Hey, good morning, guys. It's Monday morning. It's looks like it's going to be a nice day. Maybe the sun will come out, and hopefully this will be a good day. Um, Quote that I don't know if I sent it out to the baseball team last week, but it was from Bill Belichick. Of course, I'm going to quote Bill Belichick. Basically, just said, you know what? Have a good day. String a bunch of good days together, and at the end, we'll get through this thing together. So. Um, Going into like week 5 without being at school. So, hey, listen, this thing's going to end eventually. Eventually, our lives will get back to normal. Who knows what normal will look like, but it will. The question is, are you going to be ready when it gets back to normal, right? If you're an athlete, are you working out? Are you doing the things that you need to do? Um, Academically, are you studying? Are you reading? You can actually use this downtime to kind of get ahead in things. Is there something that you had an interest in but never had time to do it? Now is a good time. But when this thing is over, are you going to be ready, or are you just going to have been sitting around on a couch for 2 months? So I challenge you guys: do all the assignments that you're being given. If your coach gives you a workout, do the workout. Football guys, how many plays have you watched? How much film have you watched? How many plays have you memorized? As an example, right? Use this time to get ahead, because this thing's going to end and society is going to kick back into gear. And it's, whether or not you're ready, that's really up to you. So let me go share a screen. I'm going to do the second half of the New Deal today, or not the second half, but the second half of section 1. And hopefully you guys are watching these videos. I'm putting some questions in them. So um, all right. So here's our screen right here. Here's our classroom. There's a new assignment up here. This is a worksheet. All of the answers you should be able to find in American Yawp, and it tells you in here what sections. Okay, it's important that you're reading. Important that you're reading that online textbook. So um, here is the video that I posted last week. That there's a question in there. Some of you have gotten back to me on that question. Okay, and then hopefully by now you've all taken this quiz. There were still 2 of you hadn't taken the quiz, so hopefully you all have by now. So let me go to the slideshow, and I'm not going to quickly go through it, but I'm not going to hopefully not spend too much time. So we were talking about the New Deal, talking about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The Great Depression starts in 1929. Herbert Hoover's the president. He does nothing, laissez-faire economics. He loses the interest of the people. He loses the confidence of the people, and he's voted out in a sweeping fashion in 1932. So FDR becomes the president, and the media dubs his programs the New Deal. He kind of likes that too. He quoted something about a New Deal in a speech, so they call it the New Deal. So the question is, what is new and what is the deal? So we started talking about that, how he thought that the government's job was to help the American people. He believed that it was the government's job to help kickstart the economy. Roughly at the same time, there's an English economist, John Maynard Keynes, and he writes about how at times the economy will not fix itself. At times, the government needs to intervene in the economy to get it going. We live in that time now. We live where governments believe that they do need to get involved in the economy. I've said this a number of times. The stimulus package that was passed a couple of weeks ago, that was to give businesses some money, to give people some money to hopefully keep the economy going. Again, Hoover didn't believe in that, but FDR changes the game. He decides that it's the government's job to get involved. So talking about the farmers, part of the problem with the South was that the farmers were growing lots of cotton, and cotton wasn't really needed. People weren't buying clothes. There was a depression going on. So the federal government paid farmers to leave land unseeded in an attempt to reduce the supply. If the supply is lower, the price will come down. When the supply is when the supply is lower, the price will go up. When the supply is great, the price will come down. Part of the reason that gasoline right now is like $1.65 a gallon is there's way too much gas on the market. Saudi Arabia is flooding the oil market. and also people aren't using. So the demand is low, the supply is high, low prices. So FDR thought if we leave some land unattended, we don't grow things on it, the supply will decrease and the price will go up. He had cotton farmers plow under $200 million worth of product. So take the product off the market, the supply goes down, the price goes up. He also had hog farmers slaughter 6 million pigs, as an example. If there's less pork products on the market, the price will go up. Now, this was controversial because in the meantime, there's people who don't have any food in America. So, but we still do things like that. We still pay farmers to grow certain crops. We still pay farmers to not grow certain crops, even today. So you can see the gross farm income right here goes way down. We know this. We've been talking about this. This is World War II. World War I. This is when they were growing food for the Europeans. Okay. So this is a question on the worksheet. FDR sets up the TVA, which is the Tennessee Valley Authority. The Tennessee Valley, which is an area that kind of runs through Tennessee and down through the South. It was very rural. They didn't even have electricity. They were really, really hard hit by the Depression. So FDR establishes the Tennessee Valley Authority, and what their job was to build 5 dams on these rivers, Tennessee River specifically. And by building those dams, 2 things would happen. First, they would provide electricity for the rural South. The second was that this would put people to work building the dams. So it was 2-pronged. You get electricity, but you also put people to work. Okay, it created thousands of jobs. It also helped control, the dams helped control flood, and it created electricity for thousands. So that's definitely a question on your worksheet, the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. And here's just a map. Let me get my pointer. Here's a map. This is the Tennessee River, and you can see all that they did down through this area. This was a really economically depressed area. Not a lot going on, lots of farming, and this is the 1930s. There was still lots and lots of these farms had no electricity. By putting the dams in, hydroelectric, now they have electricity, and a bunch of people go to work. Another thing that FDR established was the CCC, or the Civilian Conservation Corps. So think about this. There's thousands upon thousands of young men out of jobs. Okay, so FDR he establishes the Civilian Conservation Corps. And this put young men age 18 to 25 to work building things like roads, building things like parks, planting trees, and over the next 10 years, 3 million men end up working for the CCC. So what would happen? The reason for this was try to take young men and give them a job. If they have a job, they have a little bit of money. If they have money, theoretically, they'll put it back into the economy. But really an important thing was that it gave guys a job. It kept them from just hanging out, gave them some self-esteem. They were building projects. They were building things that America needed. There's the 2 issues with this was, first of all, the government could have probably given this money to private companies, and then they could have built these things. That was first. Secondly, this doesn't really increase the GDP of America. This is basically just the government taking money and redistributing it. Now, there were some good things that came from this, things like roads, parks, planting trees, stuff like that. But it doesn't really kickstart the economy. It was more, it just gave guys a job, gave them some food, gave them some money. These are guys 18 to 25. Their parents couldn't afford to take care of them anymore. So, and the workers went and they stayed in these lodges and they were fed. And that was really what these guys were looking for. They were looking for a place to live and for some food. I'll let you read that letter on your own. The National Industrial Recovery Act provided money to states to create jobs in building schools. So there's a lot of schools built, a lot of community buildings. And then also the CWA, the Civil Works Administration, similar, supplied 4 million jobs during the winter of 33 and 34. So again, FDR set up these organizations, or they're not really companies, they're government run companies, and it put young men to work. And notice how it was always men, put young men to work and gave them a purpose. It did build some things that was needed. But there were people that were against this. They thought that this was the term that became known as make work. In other words, you're just making up some work for them to do, right? It's not really even work that needs to be done. And some people thought, you know what, if FDR had just taken this money and given it to hired private corporations to build these things, it would have actually been more effective. That you can decide on your own for that. The civilian works did build 40,000 schools and paid the salary of 50,000 rural school teachers and built 500,000 miles of roads. So there was some stuff that was built. So let's talk about deficit spending, okay? Deficit spending is when you are spending money that you don't have, okay? So you have $20 in your pocket and you spend 60. That would be considered deficit spending, okay? So you can see this cartoon right there. This is FDR pulling a rabbit out of his hat. He's spending money. In other words, it's like magic. He doesn't really have the money. The government didn't even really have the money. So let me just read what the critics thought. Critics of the New Deal argued that deficit spending would never solve the economic crisis, and that the programs advocated by Roosevelt bordered on socialism and the creation of the welfare state. Welfare state meaning that people had to rely on the government giving them money, okay? And socialism meaning that the government took over doing what private companies would do, like building roads, building schools. In this cartoon, FDR pulls the spending rabbit out of his hat, symbolizing that he believed in the magical nature of deficit spending. Deficit spending, you eventually have to come up with the money, okay? And the government just taking money that the country already had and putting it back into the economy doesn't really create a higher GDP. This is why it didn't really do anything to solve the Great Depression. Put some people to work, created some things that maybe the country needed, gave some people some pride in that they had a job, but it didn't really solve the problem at all. Here's just a picture. They built, probably looks like a bayou, doesn't it? Kind of like what we have in Houston. The NIRA also sought to promote industrial growth by establishing codes of fair practice for industry. So this was a little bit like socialism, where the government dictated how businesses could do business. Then there was also the NRA, not the gun, not that NRA. The National Recovery Act, established to set fair prices and set standards. Again, kind of sounds a little bit like socialism. The federal government dictating what business can and what business can't do. This was done to interrupt the trend of wage cuts, falling prices, and layoffs. People are going to be paid depending on the supply and demand of available workers. If there's lots of available workers, wages are going to be low. If there's not lots of available workers, wages will be high. It's a simple supply and demand type thing. If the government arbitrarily decides people can't make under a certain amount of money, that will never solve a problem. That will actually create more problems. So the National Recovery Act was there to set fair prices, set standards according to Roosevelt. So people would put this sign in their business window. Like, in other words, they support this. A little bit scary, like the government saying, if you don't have this, people shouldn't go visit you. This is one of the ways that they made sure that people abided by the NRA. You can read through these. These are other programs that FDR established. Some were needed, some were not. Not everyone agreed with FDR. Not everyone agreed with the New Deal. Okay. FDR did agree to deficit spending as he felt it was necessary to solve the economic crisis. Okay. He decided, you know what, we should try to spend money that we don't have. Kind of what our federal government did 3 or 4 weeks ago. Let's spend a bunch of money that we don't have. Go out and do that. Go do that in your own personal life. See how that works out. Many liberals, meaning Democrats, they didn't think that FDR did enough. They thought he should have spent more. Many conservative critics felt Roosevelt spent too much, and that really this was socialism. So we look back in history. We look back at history, and everyone likes to, in their mind, think, oh, FDR was loved. He did all this great stuff. He solved the Great Depression. That's really not the case. He had a lot of opposition. I mean, he was elected 4 times, and people did like him, but he did have a lot of opposition. They thought the conservatives thought that he interfered with free market economy. Here's how that would be. If the government decides they're going to build a road, they can decide what they're going to pay people, what quality they're going to do. Now, if you put that bid out to build a road, now you have different companies coming and bidding on that, promising to do certain things. That's free market. That's when there's competition. Competition's always good for business, always good for the workers also. And in 1935, the Supreme Court looked at some of the stuff that he was doing and said, you know what? You've gone too far. This stuff is unconstitutional. They struck down the NIRA as unconstitutional. And in 1936, they also struck down the AAA, which was the Agricultural Administration, saying that agriculture was a state concern, not federal. In other words, they said, you cannot interfere with agricultural business. That is really run by the state. The biggest thing I want you to remember is that the Supreme Court did react to it, and they did find much of his programs unconstitutional. Remember, the 1920s there had been Republican presidents. Most of the people who sat on the Supreme Court had been appointed by Republican presidents. FDR was a Democratic president, so he did not have a lot of friends on the Supreme Court. So his answer, thing we're going to end with. So his answer was, you know what? I will increase the number of justices on the Supreme Court. Okay, I'll add 6 new judges. Well, by doing that, those would all be people that he appointed, and then they would support him. So he didn't like what the Supreme Court did, so he overstepped his boundaries and said, I will just increase the size of the Supreme Court. Many people accused FDR of violating principles. This didn't work. Nobody agreed to it. It's known as Roosevelt's court packing. He just didn't like the fact that people didn't want his programs. He thought that he should get through anything put into law that he wanted. And when the Supreme Court stood in his way, he decided to kind of pull an end around. It didn't work, though. There's a cartoon of the packed court. In other words, the people that he put on, if this worked, the new justices in the Supreme Court would just be like puppets in his hands. This is Uncle Sam right here. And then we'll end with this slide. Government reorganization, which he did. And then if he could change the Supreme Court, the next step would be dictator. FDR did have a lot of people that were against him. Again, we look back on him fondly, and we should. And really, we look back on him because he also is going to be president during World War II. I would say he was a very good wartime president. I don't know that he did much to end the Great Depression, but that's one of the reasons why we look back on him so fondly, is that he did help us win World War II. So. All right. So watch that video, do the worksheet, and then we'll probably finish the chapter on Wednesday, and then we'll end up having a test next week. So please keep up with everything. Please do everything that I'm asking you to do. Some of you have zeros in there right now, and that's okay. Those zeros will stay there. If you did not hand in an assignment, hand it in. I'll change the zero. Won't get full credit, but so let me know if you need anything. Have a great week.